Hello, and welcome to Magical Journey Podcast. I am your host, Daniel Cahoon, and tonight I have a very good treat for you. Imagine being able to sit down like we did in the old days to a fireside chat of stories that we will probably have nightmares about. Tonight, we're going to do just that with my guest, Jay, who has some amazing stories to tell you from Appalachia lore. Hey,
Evening.
hey.
Good evening.
Good evening. How are you doing, Jay?
I can't complain. How about yourself?
About the same, to be honest with you. It's a good night. It's a good night. Tell us a little bit about you and where we can find your content at.
All right. Well, I grew up in Chattanooga, and I settled down here in Marion County, here near the foot of Mount Eagle Mountain, about halfway in between Chattanooga and Nashville now. But I've grown up in East Tennessee and really big into the outdoors, just your typical Southern East Tennessee boy, and had a lot of experiences, my own personal experiences. And to answer the other part of your question is mostly on here and on TT. I don't even know if I can say that on this platform, but yeah, on the shorter form, popular platform.
Mhm.
Uh, but that's primarily where I also have a subreddit for any of you nerds like me that like to read.
I gotta tell you, it's like that's probably my biggest vice is reading at this point. Um, you have a very particular interest, though, that most people probably come to you about a lot to hear about some of the stuff that you talk about. And that's the Appalachian lore and stories. Some of these things are actually stuff that people have sent to you and told you personal experiences of through
Yes.
the years. So let's talk about that for a bit here. What are a couple of the more memorable stories that you've shared or heard about?
I think probably the most memorable, at least in recent memory, is one from this girl that I shared real recently. She was started having some things going on at her home. Now this started out in London of all places. She started dating this guy from London, and she went to visit him. And he was a self-professed shaman,
Mm,
even though he has no Native American history, no Native American ancestry. But he was a self-professed shaman. So she kind of took that with a grain of salt. But they uh, they broke up eventually, and it ended on a sour note.
mhm,
Well, since then, she's been having some manifestations. Like it's like the very night she started dating another guy. Her and this new date, they were at a hotel where they started hearing knocks.
mm,
They started hearing one another's voices when they at times when they knew neither one of them was present. So mimicry, that kind of stuff. But I think the most interesting part of it is that ever since she moved, she was living in South Carolina, but she moved here to East Tennessee.
mm,
And when she was driving through around the Knoxville area and Cherokee National Forest, one night her she started getting a real bad feeling of anxiety, and she saw this pale white, like brilliant white hominid creature, like that
mhm.
with real bright blue eyes. She said if someone had told her it had been LED. that she would have believed it. And that kind of tracks with the Moon-Eyed people, especially since it's right there in Cherokee National Forest, literally in their backyard where all those stories are from. But this thing has appeared to her in her own home now. Like she's having objects fall over, like a lot of things, kind of like classic haunting stuff. But also, I don't know what I can't figure out for the life of me what this thing has to do with it. But it really tracks with also kind of like uh, the Nahulo from Choctaw legends. But this thing, she said, one night she woke up, and this wasn't sleep paralysis. She was fully awake, and this thing was in her living room with its back turned to her, and all she heard were these terrible, like, sounded like it was eating, like chomping on bones or something, or the way when you're picking bones clean, making those noises. So that's the one that's most memorable in my mind right now, just because there's so much going on there, so many layers.
Wow. Now, you mentioned the Moon-Eyed people.
Mm-hmm.
I tell you, it's one of those topics I've been trying to find people to speak on because it's really, really, that seems to be almost purely Appalachian. I haven't heard a lot of people talk about it other than in these areas here.
Oh, yeah.
So, what do you know about the Moon-Eyed people?
Well, I know that the Moon-Eyed people predated even the Native American people. They were here before the Cherokee. There's a lot of speculation, depending on what school of thought you were from, that they were an actual race of humans. There was a like a Welsh party that went to discover this part of the world and made a couple of successful trips, and they're trying to say that they made it back here and never returned. Uh, but there's some other beliefs that they were never a human race at all, uh, even though that they shared some. They spoke Welsh, and that's kind of hard to describe unless some Welsh people had made it here, somehow before. Of course, this was once part of the Scottish and the Irish Highlands, so who knows? That could have been before before the continents drifted apart, where the language similarities came into play. Uh,
That is very interesting that you mentioned that because I talk about that a lot when we start talking about the high strangeness in this area. That at one time, this was like right smack dab next to the same mountain chains that are over there in Scotland, in those areas now. So I think that's very interesting and kind of important note for me to keep in the back burner for a little bit so I can bring that forward when I need to. You have mentioned to me a couple of times about some similarities you've noticed between Mothman and the Jersey Devil. Now, this is kind of, this is kind of interesting because this is a topic that is coming up in the future, not too far away from here, on the show, both of those cryptids. So let me hear this because this is kind of, you got me wondering what you're going to tell us here.
Okay, I can't help but note. I mean, because I've been a paranormal nerd all my life. Ever since my first experience, I was checking out every book there was and listening to every story I could. So the stories of Jersey Devil go back to like early 1800s, late 1700s, as far as the first sightings. And you're talking about a large hominid creature with a giant a winged hominid creature with glowing red eyes that lives in a remote, a very remote area. Now, the Pine Barrens is also, it's not Appalachia, obviously, but it's definitely a very sparsely populated area that could host such a large predator that didn't want to be seen if they chose to be there. It just like Appalachia is also a very remote. There are definitely backcountry stretches of Appalachia where something like that, if it wanted to stay off the radar, it definitely could. And they also track with some of the Native American legends, like the Thunderbirds and stuff. In their folklore, they had giant hominid winged creatures. So I just wondering if it's its own separate class of cryptids altogether.
It seems to me like that is a verifiable argument. I mean, like, I can understand why you would think that, because now that you said that, you've got my wheels turning, dude. I'm telling you. I knew you were gonna like have me thinking before the night's over with. Thank goodness, because this has been a brain dead week. But um, so that would explain a few things, because we have the stories. I find most of them toward the Midwest a lot of times, but the giant owl stories and stuff like that, it keeps popping up as well. And by nature, most owls, I think, only get about, what, 2-3 feet tall.
Yeah,
And and there are people that are reporting 6, 7, 8 feet tall winged creatures that look like owls. So it makes me wonder if you're not onto something there, with them being their own kind of category of cryptids. Because you've got the canine, you've got the amphibious creatures, various types of cryptids out there. And I think we try to, as a whole, it feels like to me people are more comfortable talking about the things on 2 legs than, or 4 or 6 legs, than things that fly in the air. I think that terrifies us more than anything else.
well, it definitely adds another layer of fright.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely so. And speaking of fright, that kind of leads me into another question. As far as stories that you've heard, that shaman thing kind of trips me out a little bit, because the all those layers to that. But past that story, what is the most frightful experience that you've heard uh, from our locals here?
Um, the most terrifying thing that I've come across so far was my own personal experience that happened in this region. Now, right here in this southeast part of Tennessee, we're right here in North Georgia, North
Mhm.
Alabama, Western Carolina. We're all right here in the same ballpark. Uh, my wife and I signed on to run a small dairy farm for a little while in rural North Alabama,
Mhm.
Appalachia, Sand Mountain. I'm sure. Anyway, this one night, my wife, she thought she was having a nightmare, okay, and she thought she was having a sleep paralysis incident because she woke up and she thought someone was yelling in her ear, shouting, like bent over and shouting into her ear something incoherent, just unintelligible. Except when she woke up, she swore she saw something bolt into the shadows. But she thought it was sleep paralysis because she was unable to move, unable to speak. The thing is that I got roped into this because in her stiffness, like her terror, her fingernails were dug into my forearm,
Ah,
so much that it broke the skin. It
mm,
definitely it woke me up out of a dead sleep. So I sit up in the bed, and before I even have a chance, of course she's not speaking, and I have no idea what's going on with her. I was about to turn my bedside table lamp on to look around, and that's when this thing comes from out of the shadows behind me. It manifests, and the only way I can describe it is that it was made. It was like a like a monk's tunic, like a hooded cloak
mhm,
that was made out of shadow. You could have told me it was made out of a black hole,
mhm,
because the dark of this garment was darker than the dark of the darkened room. If that
mhm,
makes any sense, it was so black that it was blacker than all the shadows around it, except for where the face would be. Uh, there were two sunken voids where the eyes would have been, also that same darker than dark shade of black, and like a generic mannequin's face, where you could tell where nose or lips would be, but nothing distinguishable. That's what this thing looks like, and I'm telling you, this no more than 3 feet, no more than a meter away from me. I'm looking at this thing dead in the face, and my knee jerk reaction, like was just to pray, and my uh, the Lord's prayer is what I cited, and I just kept saying it over and over out loud. I think the second, maybe the third rendition of it, this thing bolted into the shadows of the adjoining room, and it's like it disappeared into those shadows. But I will never. It made this shrieking sound, like, and I will never forget that sound. But obviously, we turned that place upside down after that.
mm.
Uh, Turned every light in the place on. There was no intruder. Uh, of course, I wasn't, after what I'd seen and as close as I saw it, I wasn't expecting an intruder anyway. But yeah, there was just no explanation for it. That's the most terrifying thing that's ever happened to me. Uh, and it's hard when I read other stories. I mean, I've read some pretty terrifying stuff, but that's number one in my book.
Yeah, and it's very interesting because I actually I think did I send you the link to the one interview that I had with the guy that was over by Cleveland's Dome and had the uh
Yeah.
okay,
Uh,
because it's very interesting because he described something on in that was very interesting, but then he turned around this past week. I think it was the day before yesterday, and was talking about having a dream about somebody standing over him. uh, It was a really dark male voice, and he was screaming "pray" in his ear. I thought that was very interesting when you were talking about your wife experiencing somebody screaming in her ear like that, that the parallels to those stories were very interesting. There's a lot of synchronicity, it seems like.
See, I didn't hear that part. I heard the part. I didn't hear he alluded to a previous case that was ongoing with him, but I didn't hear that part. So now that's kind of blowing my mind.
Well, the screaming in the ear is very recent. That has been sometime this week.
Oh wow.
So it's very interesting that we have this kind of synchronicity going on there. Uh, wow. I'm telling you, the things that come up in the lives lately are sometimes get very mind blowing. The things that come up in interviews, period, get very mind blowing at times lately. You mentioned Sand Mountain. Now, there's one thing about Sand Mountain that's very little known fact. There was a group, there was a religious sect, if you will, that started on Sand Mountain eons ago called the Free Holiness. And most people, unless you live in Appalachia, wouldn't even know what the Free Holiness are. But they were, that was where they first started at, was Sand Mountain, a charismatic group. There's stories from back in the day. Of course, they originally, were snake handlers and whatever. Um, there's stories from back in the day of them, even drinking strychnine to prove their faith and so forth, and it not harming them. I've seen videos. Somebody took video at one time of one of their outdoor prayer meetings, and they were literally leaning over. They had torches. They were kneel down on the ground. They had torches between their knees, holding the torches up, and they were leaning down on top of the fire, praying. And when they raised back up, they were untouched. And several people over the years have asked me, do you think that is a miracle? Or do you think there's something else going on there? And I have no idea how to answer that. But I do know that area around North Alabama is incredibly magical, I guess is the best way to put it. There's a lot of crazy stuff happening in those areas too. Over in North Alabama. I grew up in an area called New Market. I spent some of my childhood over in New Market, and my own experiences, paranormal experiences, started over there in that area. So, yeah. What do you think? Because every time I have a conversation with somebody about the strange and unusual in these areas, somewhere along the line, it inevitably winds up going back to people talking about things revolving around the cave systems and the mineral deposits in these areas and so forth. And, just the incredibly unusual connection that this land seems to have by its very nature to the paranormal. What are your thoughts on that?
I absolutely agree or believe that the caves have something to do with it. As I was just watching something about the Brown Mountain Lights today. It's another story that I've covered that I've been hearing my whole life. But the composition of quartz that we have, it's definitely it's a conductor of electricity. I think that the ground, the mountains itself, definitely holds some energy, and it makes it geologically and geographically unique. And that's why we have so much more spiritual or or high strangeness, whatever you want to call it. We have so much activity in this area. Plus, they're saying now that this is like the oldest inhabited section of the earth. So just playing the odds, it's bound. If it's anywhere, it's going to be here.
Right. I kind of feel that because where we're at is unique in that we're kind of nestled between the 33rd and 37th parallels. And we're also not that far away from Asheville, North Carolina, which, if you look at the positioning of Mount Shasta, Sedona, and Asheville, they kind of form what I call the vortex triangle through the entire country. And everything seems to point directly in that direction of Asheville from there. And that's one of the things that when I talk about the significance of the area that I call Zone 1 now, which takes up from North Georgia and North Alabama all the way up to Ohio. Asheville falls in a very interesting location within Zone 1. So it's, to me, it feels like when we have situations like, people were talking about how Helena was, was kind of it was a mystery. That storm was a mystery. It should not have happened. That by nature, storms like that don't occur. So there's a lot of conspiracy theories that Helena was a generated storm, and it hit the area that it hit as a land grab, in a sense. So I feel like you. One of the things that people are concerned about is, protecting this area, protecting our home, because of its mystical and magical connections. And I think there's some things that we know about it subconsciously that maybe drives us to be the people we are here. I mean, when you get into Appalachian mentality, there is nobody more determined, more capable, more adaptable in so many ways than the folks of this region. And I feel like collectively we understand that this is home for us because we were put here because of what we know, if that makes sense, because of our connection to this area, on a spiritual level. So when I hear some of the stuff some of the stories that you tell and some of the experiences that these people have come to you about, it really, to me, brings a very big significance to the power of this area. The mythology, if you want to, some people will call it mythology. Um, the legends, of this area bring about something that is very important to humankind. That's what I will say about that. And I think that the people here are the perfect people to be stewards of that. Um, and in the back of our minds, that's why I guess what I'm trying to say is we know what we know, and we
Okay.
know what our we you know what I'm saying, and we know as a collective people we've been taught all of it throughout generations now what our responsibility to the land is.
I believe that. I agree with that. I think that's why there are so many families that have been here for so many generations. I know I can track both sides of my family back down to the earliest settlers here. Some of us have branched off and have moved to other parts, but the core of us are still here in Appalachia.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, even the descendants of my folks, I always joke and say folks don't know here that the L is silent in Cahoon, but it's Calhoun here in the South, and there are branches of that family that go back to um, our original ancestor, William I. Cahoon. And I always tell people it's like my family's connection to this area, you know, kind of goes back to the 1600s, really, when our first ancestor came here. So even though he was in Block Island, Rhode Island, his children came down this way, some of them. Um, if you were to pinpoint one of the more interesting and colorful beings that you've heard about or encountered, not necessarily terrifying, but just kind of the character of the bunch, which one would you say it would be?
I'm a sucker for Bigfoot stories. I love cryptids, but yeah, I think I shared one from Appalachian, Ohio, not just a few days ago about an encounter with the juvenile Bigfoot, and the experience was kind of just I don't know. I wish this one had happened to me as opposed to the submitter of this story. And usually it's the other way around. I'm glad it happened to them, but uh, his mom had just happened to talk him into packing a couple of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches with him for a hunting trip. And he decided finally he was going to take a break and leaned up against a tree, and he looked up and there's a juvenile Bigfoot, and he throws one of Mom's PB&J sandwiches to it, and they had a moment there. They shared a moment, and he thinks that Mom's PB&J had something to do with it. But I don't know. I've always kind of been fascinated with the Bigfoot stories, and I never really was scared. Now I heard a story today though out of Paris, Tennessee. Have you ever heard the old Mormon legend of the Bigfoot in Paris, Tennessee? Like
I
one,
have I have not.
okay, it was David Patton, I think Daniel Patton, David Patton, one of the first Mormon priests to ever visit the area. This is like 1700s is when he for no, it was early 1800s. But anyway, he was in the outlying areas of Paris, Tennessee, and he was on his mule, and it was supposed to be a large mule. It was like I think 18 hands tall. Anyway, so he says as he's walking or as he's riding his mule through the woods, this what he described as a man, except this man was very dark skinned, totally naked, and very hairy all over. Started walking alongside him for a couple of miles. Well, he said this thing was shoulder height with him, but it was on foot and he was on horseback. So that had to put it around 7 or 8 foot tall. Well, of course, nobody had heard of Bigfoot in early. There wasn't even a name for it. So the way he described it as a man, well, he started to talk to it. He said that the thing had a very gruff voice, uh, could hardly intelligible, but he could. He asked him where he came from or where he lived, and said he didn't live. You just blinked. Oh, the thing said it didn't live anywhere. That it was charged with roaming the earth, and it called nowhere, no one place home.
Huh.
And he asked it. Well, then and it also said, well, what do you do? He said, well, I've been charged with devouring the souls of all mankind. And he asked it to identify itself. It identified itself as Cain. So Cain, like Cain that slayed his brother in the Old Testament. So he on the power of Christ and on the power of the church, he renounced it and it fled. So I've never heard that before, but that's and it's a enduring folklore from the Mormon Church, that's still hotly debated to this day. But I'd never heard that Bigfoot story. But that puts it, early 1800s. They've been seeing this thing for a long time now.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. It would be interesting to find somebody within the Mormon community that knows more about some of the cryptid legends and so forth, and see if they will actually talk about it. Because here's the thing that I have found. over time. There are some of the Mormon communities that are way more open-minded about some things than the general body is. One case in particular I know of was a young lady who I actually met on TikTok, who at one point had an account on TikTok, and she was openly practicing witchcraft and a devout Mormon. And I asked her one day, I said, "Aren't you a little worried about your bishop finding this account?" And she goes, "Oh, no, we have conversations all the time."
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty
Yeah.
progressive.
Well, some areas, I mean, look, when I lived in Chickamauga, Georgia, which is, I tell you, remind me to ask you about something over that way too in a minute. There was two kinds of people in Chickamauga, well, three kinds of people in Chickamauga. There were the Protestants,
Mm.
the Masons, and the Mormons. That was the three types of people that I knew in Chickamauga. You were either one or both or all of those communities, but those were the three communities that were there. Chickamauga's only got what, 2 stop signs, if that.
I think they might have 2 stop lights now, but yeah, it hasn't changed much since I was a kid.
Yeah, their libraries in the old train depot, or it was. I don't know if they moved it since I've been there. So let me ask you: are you familiar with? Let's see. I think it's over in Lafayette or Lafayette, depending on how you want to pronounce it. There was a group of buildings that were at one time during the Civil War was actually, I believe, had been used by the Union during that time as a base, and they had been converted into apartment buildings.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
it's like it was several of them. They were old white buildings, and they were definitely constructed. I mean, you could tell the era they were constructed in
Mhm.
by the look of them. And I stayed at one for just a period of time. I had an apartment over there, and I gotta tell you, that was the creepiest feeling being in there sometimes. I wonder, have you heard anybody from that area talk about any unusual stories from back then?
No, nothing specific to Lafayette. Lafayette would be, of course, for correct pronunciation of it, but the North Georgia locals definitely call it Lafayette. But no, I haven't heard anything specific to that area.
Wow. Wow, yeah. I just remember just the short period of time that I was there, I always felt like it was and it was a studio apartment too, and I always felt like it was crowded in there. That's the best way I could explain it. Um, what have you heard about, or have you heard anything from the independent state of Dade?
Of Dade
Dade County.
County. No, I haven't heard anything. I haven't heard anything specific to Dade County either.
That's
Well,
interesting.
I'd love to. If you've got one, I'd love to hear it because
I have not heard any. I'm just curious about, because I just remember the first time I heard about Dade County, somebody said, I was walking down the street and having a conversation with a couple of people there in Chickamauga, and they were like, have you been to the independent state of Dade yet? And I'm like, what are you talking about? And they started laughing. They said it's an ongoing joke around here. It's like old joke going back to the Civil War. And they told me about the whole story about Dade. And after that, I was like, I'm sure there's got to be some craziness over that way, because those folks were so determined to be individual that they separated from the whole Confederacy and created the smallest state in the country at that time, probably.
I think the only thing I ever heard, even from that period, was about an old moonshine still that used to open up, that used to be on that part of Lookout Mountain. But there was nothing paranormal to it, not that story anyway.
Wow, yeah. Lookout Mountain is also an area that's quite interesting. It has an old history to it. A lot of a lot of people just think about the tourist part of it.
Mm-hmm.
They don't realize that back in on those back roads, there are families that live back there.
Absolutely.
Some of them that's lived back there for years. And do you ever find people from that area that have had experiences on Lookout Mountain?
Hang on now. I can't think. I've definitely heard some paranormal experiences from Lookout, but I think more not necessarily the North Georgia side of Lookout, more the Tennessee side of Lookout. But I can't think of one off the top of my head. But there's a lot of Civil War history there, and I'm sure that was probably tied into it. That's where the Battle Above the Clouds was.
Yeah. That's so, like, that whole area over there, I was always amazed by. It's very beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
But it's an area that, like, when the sun goes down, you just know there's something not right there. You just know. And I guess the thing that is now the internet's made it really popular. People talk about the do's and don'ts of living in Appalachia. Most of the don'ts, with the closing your curtains at night. If you hear it, if you see it, you don't.
Right. No, I say on my channel, we didn't have the benefit of an entire compiled list. We didn't have that luxury when I was growing up in East Tennessee, but those superstitions definitely existed in our culture, definitely permeated our culture. Now, I do remember hearing as far back as when I was a young kid, don't go whistling at night. I heard that one my whole life. To this day, I have 3 large mirrors in my bedroom, and they definitely they're covered up with quilts because they're attached to the pieces of furniture that are just too inconvenient to move. But I won't sleep with a mirror facing me. There are families around here that when they have a relative pass away in the household, they'll cover their mirrors until the body is committed to the ground or cremated. And even some of the mom and pop funeral homes around here still allow sitting with the dead, like, which is an old Southern custom. They'll actually let family members stay with the body even after they close up. They'll just leave the door open for them and let them stay there if they want. So there's some things that still go on here in the South especially in Appalachia, that's not necessarily practiced anywhere else.
Yeah. Well, I remember as a kid, even, they would have visitations in people's homes still. And I definitely remember one in particular, a cousin of mine, who when he passed, they asked the kids, said, "Were you gonna, we need to get ready to go. Are you going with?" And because we had the choice usually to either go into that or going to grandma's house. a lot of times we would choose to go to grandma's house, but for some reason that day I think because there was two aunts that were going to be there that I was really excited to see. I said, yeah. And I was expecting us to go to a funeral home. I had never been to a house visitation. Well, this was over in an area that was called Hurricane Holler. And they asked me on the way there, said, my mom turned around and goes, are you excited about seeing Aunt Effie? And I said, yeah. And she said, well, she'll be at the house. And I thought they were talking about, the afterwards, we usually always went to dinner because I guess for some reason they was always going to funerals, made people hungry. That's what I always thought as a kid. And we drove up and I was like, well, I thought we were going to the funeral home. And they were like, no, he's here. And I just remember walking in there and here's his casket laying out in the living room. And I'm going, whoa, wow. So yeah, tradition, there's a lot of old traditions. And which brings me to a couple of questions for you. How many times did you ask somebody as a kid, what's this and what's that? And they always, like, especially if it was something that kind of didn't seem to fit with everything in the house, and they would look at you and go, oh, that's just for good luck.
Yeah. Or it's bad luck. Yeah. All the time. No good explanation other than it's good luck if you do or bad luck if you don't. Definitely big part of our culture still.
Oh yeah, yeah. The thing that I always found really amusing as I grew up and started understanding certain traditions and so forth was iron horseshoes in everybody's house.
Mhm.
And I remember a few times seeing, like, the older relatives, they would have railroad ties sitting around their house, like in a basket or something, or whatever. And I was like, what are you doing with that? What's that? They would always say, oh, it's just good luck. And and of course now I know a lot more about their traditions
Yeah.
and where those things come from. It's like red brick dust. I Growing up, I couldn't understand why I would go to a relative's house and they would have red brick dust sprinkled over, like, the threshold of their doors.
No, I didn't know about that one. School me.
It's red brick dust is to keep paints and bad energy out of your house.
Just like the iron was and
Yeah.
Hank and witches. Of course, we're not talking about the modern Wiccan. We're talking about more of the old textbook classic nemesis witch. Those kind of.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it was actually, now I've found out over the years, it was actually a hoodoo practice.
Mm,
Um, at certain points, at least, that's where it eventually landed at. But some of these traditions, go back to, because once slaves became free, some of them went to the mountains,
mm,
and they would be living next, down the road a bit from white families, and eventually they started talking and sharing some of their traditions between the two people, and yourself, a Scottish person, you get them, like, catch them on a day when they're feeling good and they've had a couple of beers in them, they'll talk your ear off for hours.
yeah.
So um they would exchange this information, and that's uh where hoodoo really came from. It's kind of a collaboration of voodoo and Appalachian folk
Right.
magic. And so yeah, a lot of those things that were good luck, comes from the early years of the formulation of hoodoo. So I always found that very interesting.
Me too.
'Cause
Go ahead.
yeah, it's funny too, because if you remember, um, I think it was mostly the Church of Christ that would do it, but they would always have New Testaments, but they would have the Proverbs and the Psalms in that volume. And that would be the only books that they would have in that were Old Testament books. And I would ask them, I was like, why you, they were like, I was like, where's the rest of your Bible? And they would laugh and say, what do you mean? I said, well, you got the New Testament, and you got the Psalms, you got the Proverbs, but you don't have the rest of the Old Testament. Oh, we don't need that part anymore. And my understanding is because the Proverbs and the Psalms were used as incantations.
Now, I grew up mostly Baptist and Methodist. We all have most of us are exposed heavily to religion here in Appalachia, one denomination or other. But that's mostly my background. But I don't think I haven't heard that one.
Really, it's very interesting because I remember in particular my the grandmother. She was always an interesting person. She always had a cauldron outside that she made soap in, but occasionally she would make like cough syrups and so forth like that in it, in the same cauldron of all things. I don't know how she cleaned the lye out of those suckers, but she must have somehow, because we never died. But
That sounds like some good old granny magic there.
oh, she was well. That's what I used to tell people all the time. I grew up with a root doctor right there in the house, because she was always doing stuff like that, and they were the first ones that I ever saw that had a Bible, a New Testament Bible that had the Psalms and the Proverbs in it. And I always thought that was interesting. And then over the years, I remember just vaguely seeing, every once in a while, I would go to somebody's house and they would have, it would say New Testament with on the cover, and then right down below it, it would say Psalms and Proverbs. And I never could, for the longest time, I used to think that was the weirdest thing. But of course, now I know that was a hoodoo practice at one point.
Oh, of course, over my lifetime, I've seen hundreds of the miniature copies of just the New Testament version of the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't think to look and see if it had Psalms and Proverbs included in there. Do they? Do the little miniature ones? Is that for that same denomination, that same sect of the church?
I'm not really sure. Are you talking about the Gideon Bibles?
No, not the Gideons. Usually the Gideons place the King James version.
Yeah. They always had those little pocket versions they would hand out at the fairgrounds.
Okay, so those were Gideons in just the New Testament only, though?
I think those only had the New Testament. Maybe
Okay.
they had Proverbs. Now you got me wondering. I'll have to go back and research that. But yeah, I know the Gideons always, when I would go to the fairgrounds, there was always a booth that the Gideons, somebody was passing out Gideon Bibles. And I just thought to myself, surely to goodness, everybody has at least 3 or 4 copies of the same little pocket Bible and all over the place in their house, because they were always passing them out back then.
Yeah, you saw them everywhere.
Everywhere.
And as a matter of fact, the physical therapy hospital I just got out of here a couple of weeks back had a Gideon's Bible in the drawer. it was a throwback because I hadn't seen one in years. But this was the full size,
Mhm.
KJV. But I was just like, wow, I haven't seen Placed by the Gideons in ages.
Yeah, yeah. Is I don't even know if they use the Gideon version in hotels now. I'm sure they still do, some of them. Although I went to this will be interesting for uh, a little interesting side note. I want to say it was one of the hotels there in Pulaski, Tennessee, and they had a copy of the Bhagavad Gita in the drawer there.
Really?
Yeah. And not just the Bhagavad Gita, but the one that's published by the International Society of Krishna Consciousness.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
I
I
would have.
found that, yeah, I found that very interesting. Um, Along that line, Pulaski also, they had that old ballroom there on the square where the theater is. There on the square in downtown. They have it's the community theater is still active there, but the upstairs of that building, there's a staircase, an old metal staircase that goes up top.
Mhm.
And most of the time there's no access to that area because it really is in disrepair. Uh, but they used to have until about, I think last year was the last time they did this. They had they would open up the building for ghost hunts, public ghost hunts, and the Antoinette Ballroom is what it was called. Uh, during its heyday, it was actually quite the spectacle. They would have events in there and so forth all the time, and it was quite beautiful at one time. Uh, but there's also a doctor's office and a lawyer's office that was up there in that upper floor, and that building is supposedly haunted by uh, the original owner of Antoinette Hall.
This one's clicking with me. It's ringing a bell. I'm pretty sure I've heard this one before.
Yeah, and there's a little girl that was an actress. She was about 8 years old, and she died in a car accident, and her spirit supposedly haunts there.
Um, like
So yeah, if you get the opportunity, research Antoinette Hall, the spirits of Antoinette Hall.
Antoinette Hall. I will. I'm certain I've heard it before. Like I said, I was that kid that I checked out every book that the elementary school library had. I was always reading just came natural to me, and I
Mhm.
think I couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old the first time I had a paranormal experience, and ever after that, I was always checking out everything I could find on the subject. So, and especially the local ones, like uh, I don't know. It's hard to get a read on your age. Were you Generation X?
I am. I'm
Okay.
definitely there.
So you remember libraries and not everything being on.
Right. Oh
Uh,
God, the Dewey Decimal System
okay, so
and those
uh,
silly cards.
yeah, then you feel my pain. Back then, it was 13 Tennessee Ghosts and Jeffrey, 13
Mhm.
Alabama Ghosts and Jeffrey. You remember those?
Oh yeah,
I
yeah.
I read all of those. I read every, and like I said, anything printed, especially like Dixie or Southern, I read everything I could snap up, and still do. Like anything from this region, of course I read stuff from all over, but Appalachia and the South in particular are the ones I really love.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. And there's so many like I I'll tell you the thing that I'm about to start digging into and trying to find out more about is the what do they call it, the hall there in Franklin, Kentucky, Octagon Hall.
Octagon Hall, Franklin.
It was at one time it was a big plantation apparently, and it's like there's two spots I know of in Franklin, Tennessee that are rather active. Octagon Hall is definitely one of them. And then the old stone jail there in Franklin. I've done I've done a weekend at the jail doing investigation. And I gotta tell you, Jay, I have never in my life had like when I've had been doing an investigation, had like smelled things around me. But me and the friend of mine that was there doing this investigation, neither one of us wear cologne, but we went down to this one room in particular that was part of the living quarters for the jailer, because at that time they had to have people living there on the facility.
Right.
There was a distinct smell of an old-fashioned men's cologne that kept popping up, and it would follow us around that room.
Wow.
And we would sit there. We both, Austin and I, both turned around, looked at each other, and go, "Do you smell that?" Almost at the same time. And I thought, well, at least I know I haven't lost my mind. But the old stone jail there in downtown Franklin is definitely an active place too.
I've
So
seen I've seen some I watch a lot of investigations too. I've seen some investigations at that place. I don't know that the cologne thing made it to the investigations that I've seen, but that's interesting.
yeah, that was a thing that really made me a believer in the activity in there, because I've never experienced that. And I mean, I was around Austin all day before that. I literally met them at the hotel uh, to get ready to go over there. So I knew he didn't have cologne on. He doesn't wear cologne. I knew I didn't have cologne on. And it had a period smell to it. You know what I mean? There was
Right.
just there's some of the old classic colognes that not just everybody wears anymore. So, and this was one of them. I could tell by the smell of it that it was one of the old fashioned ones. And I was like, I think I even said at one point, because there was also another smell that I kept smelling. It was like I call it a musty old man smell. And,
Well,
and Austin said the same thing. He said, yeah, I smelt that too. And, but the cologne smell stuck around longer and followed us more.
well, thank goodness for that.
Yeah, yeah. um, so as we're topping into, I can't even believe we've been talking for an hour. That's crazy. As we're heading into the top of the hour, I always like to ask my guests as we close out the show to leave us with some final thoughts for the night. So, what do you have for us tonight, Jay?
Final thoughts.
Final thoughts.
Uh, I don't know. I I believe that what you and I are doing is important work. Both of us. Uh, your investigations and your studies are important, and the reason that I preserve these stories is because I believe that there's value to that also. Some of my most fond memories growing up were having these stories and the way they were told. There's an art to that, and I think that it would be a shame if the next generations didn't have that, if that were to be lost to time. Not only that, but it's also they need the information. They need to know what they're walking into. Uh, and that's why I think that your side of it is also very important. You know, we keep these stories going, we keep these investigations going. Uh, so if you had to put me on the spot and ask me to give a parting shot like that, then I would say, yeah, that's what it's all about. Is just leaving something behind for the next generation.
I agree with you. I agree with you. This has been a very uh, as usual with everything with you, it's a very exciting thing to actually hear some of the stuff and your storytelling skills I think are quite amazing. It's like because you draw, we mentioned earlier Jared King, uh, and you kind of draw people in the same way he does. Y'all just have this knack for being able to relate uh, these things in a way that makes you really want to go back for more. So I encourage you guys to check out Jay on both YouTube and the TikTok. Uh,
I take
Jay,
that. Sorry, I didn't mean to tell you, but I
oh no,
have to interject here that I take that as a compliment of the highest order. Jared is like my icon. So if I'm anywhere in that ballpark, I'm satisfied. Seriously.
you
And
guys, you guys definitely you have the same feel he does in a lot of ways. Jay is you can almost smell and taste Appalachia in what you're saying, and that's a gift, and it's a strength that I think is really truly very Appalachian, is being able to relate things in a way that's very real and very grounded and very earthy and relatable to anybody. Yeah. So I appreciate you and I thank you for coming on tonight.
I was about to
Um,
say, well, we're going to have to get together, and there's going to have to be a part two to this at least.
absolutely.
I
Um,
definitely enjoyed being on the show. You're very thought provoking, man. Like people haven't made me think this hard in a while. So and I appreciate that. You know, I like to be put outside my own comfort zone sometimes. I appreciate that, man. Uh, to make me sweat a little bit and have to think. So I appreciate that. I
it,
enjoyed it.
it's good. I try not to put people on the spot so much, but even in just daily conversation, though, I guess I have a habit of being a little bit thought provoking. Maybe comes from being an investigator for a long time now.
Yeah, it's definitely not a bad trait to have, man. Like I said, I'm glad. Yeah, it got me to thinking, and I like thinking.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I appreciate you, Jay, and have a good rest of the night. I will definitely get back with you on a follow up, at least one more, at least one more,
All
because
right,
I I think our folks will appreciate you.
all right, man. You do the same. Have a good evening, brother.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
All right, guys, that was Jay, and let me just emphasize and say to you guys, if you get an opportunity, please go over and support his channel and um and support his work because he is quite the storyteller. He's very much really kind of what Appalachia is about in some ways, to be honest with you. Each one of these folks from this area that I bring on lately are a good taste of uh, the culture, the experiences, the paranormal experiences of this area. So appreciate them, support them, and love them for who they are. And I will see you guys next week as usual. May your journey always be magical.
I've waited for so long to see when you come back to me. Through the wars and battles that were lost, we're born again, it's you and me. The rest is history. Past lives. Past lives. Did we dance together on different floors in 1500 or 1504? We must have been lovers, we must have been some